Okay, so we're going to do here reading comprehension, and this is just to get you into the tone so that you can answer questions. It's for test taking, ACT, GRE, and SAT and ACT for anything, and just general reading. Yes, ma'am, Sylvia said, then held her tongue as she walked back across the pine floor that had been painted white, the way everything in this room was white, from the cot to the stool to the hearth of the frame that held the president's likeness. Sylvia reasoned that the preponderance of white in this room was Dr. Miss's attempt at coding a swath of purity over the various situations that found their way there. Though Dr. Miss prided herself on delivering the babies of literate, well-to-do African American parents, attracted to her because her father had been a respected intellectual, a Freemason, a barber who had dispensed fiery diatribes against slavery right along. With a perfect cut and shave, there was an underbelly to her practice that she kept hidden from her respectable clientele, where she expertly removed formations. Dr. Miss called them when a woman was not legally betrothed, or too young, or too old, or too fragile, or in the case of Mida, escorted under the cover of night by a wealthy white man in a two-horse carriage. We're going to go ahead and answer some of these questions because as you're thinking, these words were underlined for you, but this is really generally the situation. Preponderance of white, underbelly, betroth. These words all mean something, and the word betroth is kind of common, you should know. And I'll go over this word on the store, but when you see a word that's like looks difficult, like preponderance, you have to look at how it's used in the sentence. So Sylvia reasoned that the preponderance of white in this room was Dr. Miss's attempt at coding a swath of purity over the various situations that found their way there. When you look at the general tone of this, and this is from the book Lazaretto by Diane McKinney Whetstone. Her tone is very much that she's using words like purity. She's using words like white. There's a cot. So you should be getting that, all these words not legally betrothed, that she's kind of performing abortions. So she's a delivery woman. She delivers children, but like respectable clientele, you have people who did things they didn't want their wives to know about. So she's a deliverer. She's a midwife, but it kind of alludes to that if she's a midwife and she can pretty much get children out of the womb, she can pretty much, I want to say the right words, but she can pretty much perform abortions. Let's put it that way. So, using these words here, under, and then she uses the word under the cover of night. And we get this word again. And without sounding racist, she's kind of telling you a contrast, kind of like African American parents. But then ever so often she gets wealthy white men too. So she's kind of well known. You're getting that. And whenever you're talking about innocence, usually symbolically the word white is used for innocence. And she makes the room white to make it look clean, to make it look this, but then she's doing these kind of bad things. And that's where you get the tone here when you use this word underbelly. Because underbelly sometimes means rude, mean, cruel. Okay, so the word preponderance can be replaced with which synonym? So which word is just like it? So if you go back, Sylvia reasoned that the first of white in this room. Okay, so probably not. Sylvia reasoned that the overabundance of white in this room was Dr. and Mrs. attempts at coding, and you could even leave this word out, but it's purity over the various situations. So this is a possibility. And let me check it in red so you can see it. So that's a possibility. Reason that a preponderance was a lust. Well, lust only relates to, and those of you who know the word lust, lust means like to really want to go out with somebody badly or to do something. Lust would only get when you talk about men. And in this case, women. This is talking about time when slavery was against. And Lazaretto was written in, I'm looking at the copyright because I hadn't done that before. It was written in actually 2016. Okay, but it's talking about a time that was probably a little later than that, because you get the things. He'd been an intellectual, a Freemason, a barber. In the African American community, a barber was kind of high class back in the day. They were trained, they were skilled, they're technical, and even now they make a lot of money. But now, because relaxed segregation, you have doctors, lawyers, teachers, engineers, and you have another class of people that they called who? Intellectuals. So if you were in that class back in this time when this play was probably written, because you would have looked up to, you would have been looked up to because of the situation. So I'm looking at the mother's first quarantine was not in 1970. First quarantine was not in 2020. So more than likely she's going back at a certain time. But anyway, this word preponderance, back to this barbarous, means almost the same as lust. If you look at your root words, this is barbaric. Okay, meaning that you're so beastly and so crazy. And so out. So there's a preponderance of white impurity. So there's not a preponderance of first. First is a distractor. So B is the answer. It's in overabundance. Okay, and let me write this here for you. As I'm writing this, you should be looking over the paragraph and looking at what's going on and what other clues can tell what's going on here. So when we go to number 2, and remember I said that was underlined, the author probably uses the word underbelly to suggest which of the following. Okay, the author wanted to show that Dr. Miss was a specialist who worked with pregnancies. Okay, she might. That's a plus, maybe. The author wanted to inform the audience that Dr. Miss had other talents the community didn't know. Possibly. The author wanted the audience to know that Dr. Miss was pregnant. If she's pregnant, she's lying down. She'd say something else. Like up here, she wouldn't use the word her practice, because she'd be dealing with somebody else's practice, even if it was another midwife delivering her baby. And if she's on the couch getting a baby delivered or having an abortion, she's not going to be compared to her clientele. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and put not her pregnancy. So she's not pregnant. It's her clientele. So you have to look for these specific clues when you're reading. Some people don't like to read a lot, and they don't read as well or as fast. And this is how we get there. The author wanted the audience to determine the number of pregnancies Dr. Miss delivered. That's out of scope, and it's way too broad, because she didn't mention numbers. She was real specific. Formations, real general, too old, respectable, dispensed, fiery, diatribes. Dia in this case means two, so it's going against two tribes, two different kinds of thoughts. Get your word order. So now if you want to come back down, we're between A and B. Okay, so underbelly. Because her father had been a respected intellectual, a Freemason, and a barber who dispensed fiery diatribes against slavery right along with the perfect cut and shave, there was an underbelly to her practice that she kept hidden from her respectable clientele, where she expertly removed formations. That's a nice way of saying she's removing fetuses, things that are already formed. So they want to show she's pregnancy. That's what takes us out. We already know she's a midwife. Listen to me. She's a midwife. That was given back in the first paragraph, the very beginning. But this is specifically talking about what's happening. So this is B. And you have this word here, hidden. And it goes hidden, goes back to underbelly. Hidden from her respectable clientele. She didn't want anyone to know that she also did abortions. And even though you can guess and say something else, like people probably knew it, but just for purposes of this article and of this first paragraph, this is the answer. Okay, so we'll move on in a second. The author probably uses the word formations to imply which of the following. So let's go find this word formations, and here it is. And expertly remove formations. What are they talking about? Coating of purity, perfect cut, underbelly. This is here. You just have to look at what's going on and think it through. So I think because she was arrogant and rude, maybe. Was she chafing pregnant women's underbellies? Is that what she said? She might have. Okay. Did you think the author wanted to be this crude to show that when we were talking about Dr. Miss? Call them when somebody was not legally married. That's what betrothed means. She prided herself on delivering the babies of the literate, well-to-do African-American families. So she had this character, but then she also did some things that were kind of under. They call them underbellies, like abortions, as we mentioned before. Legally betrothed, or too old, or too fragile. Or in the case of Mita, escorted by, so you know she's having here an affair. And not to say there's anything wrong with it, it's a racial affair. And I'm going to show you something on the next slide that maybe this time period with all this mentions, and this period in time, maybe it kind of is. So we want to get what the larger picture is. This is possible. But let's get the larger picture. Dr. Miss helped wealthy people hide their indiscretions. Okay, he's wealthy. This makes a difference because what year is it? 17. He spoke against slavery. And he's wealthy. So we're talking about had to be somewhere between, because slavery was like kind of over 1865. So let's take this 80s out. Let's take this last date out. Let's do like 64-ish. So somewhere in this time period. Okay, and Dr. Miss was a Freemason who helped build rockstones and other formations. This is called a distractor. It's meant for you, the people who have not learned to read with discretion. and who just haphazardly read and say, hey, I saw Freemason up here, they build, and this, and then draw all these conclusions that are not there, and you go ahead and you choose this answer. And it's the wrong one. Okay, so what's the big picture? Was Dr. Miss arrogant or rude? The room was white. She had some elegance. The woman respected her. She said, yes, ma'am. Mrs. attempt at coding a swathing of purity over the various situations she found. She's trying to cover things, so she's got a little bit of politeness there. So, maybe not. So I don't think that's the overall she's trying to say. Dr. Miss was chafing pregnant women's underbellies. Is that the big picture? It could be, except for she brings up these words: respectable clientele, too old or too wealthy. So she's doing more than just going here. So it's not B. And so therefore it's C. This is a polite word for it's a polite way to say babies. Children that you don't want, children you have to hide, and before we get too political, children you have to hide because of certain situations that go on during this time. So she says, well, there's a formation. So she doesn't just come out and say, something rude that's going to upset Meta or Meta more. So you look at that. And then on the next slide, this is the next part of the paragraph, but I just wanted you to look at this. And here's the author, Diane McKinney Whetstone. And here's what Lazarettos were. Quarantine stations came from this man, Lazarus, named after him, and the Catholics call him Saint Lazarus. There's also a saint called Saint Lazarus, but anyway, 1700s, they're quarantined for yellow fever. So this book gets into that. But here, what I was talking to you about, she mentioned she's skilled midwife. She set up, you have all these other words, and this would go on to the next part of part 2 when I put this up next week. Then we're going to get into this novel and use it as SAT material or for you to learn to read better. Thanks for watching.